Hello and welcome to The Analyst by Vajiram and Ravi, your daily space to simplify current affairs and turn them into meaningful UPSC preparation. It's August 13, 2026 and today we have two important themes for your mains 2026 preparation. First, we examine the significance of the MMDR Amendment Bill 2026 and what changes in India's mining framework. Next, we look at a timely reset for the Food Security Act, asking how India can strengthen food security while making the system more efficient, sustainable and responsive. We will also bring you mains value addition materials from today's current affairs with useful data, examples, reports and case studies to help you add more depth to your answers. And finally, we will wrap up the session with the prelims pointers, which will be highly crucial for your upcoming prelims 2027 examination. So let's begin. Hello all, welcome back to Analyst. I hope all of you are doing well. I hope your preparation is also going fine. So with this, let us start with the very first article of the day, which is focused on the recent Mines and Minerals Amendment Bill 2026. Yesterday, this bill was passed in the Parliament without much debate. And this is why we have to focus mainly on the broader context of how this amendment bill is going to impact India's overall mining industry. Because from the broader perspective of your prelims, mainly with reference to the MMDR Act and its various objectives, one of which includes the classification of the same minerals into major and minor minerals, UPSC loves asking you questions regarding the various types of major and minor minerals in prelims. Apart from this, there have been various questions on the various institutions set up under the MMDR Act. Now, when we talk about mains, especially which is upcoming very soon, the various factors responsible for location of industries or the center-state relations and finally infrastructure as a sector, this is where all the topics of mining become very important. So let us start with absolute basics, understanding why we need the MMDR Act in the very first place. All of us know very well that India is actually highly rich in the minerals, in the variety of types of minerals that are scattered throughout the country. So generally, when we talk about various minerals such as metallic and non-metallic types, we understand that from Kashmir to Kanyakumari, throughout the various length and breadth of the country, we have huge number of minerals. Now comes the main question: who is going to regulate the minerals? Who is actually going to look after the welfare of the villagers or the various tribal sections if their homes or lands are taken away for mineral development of the country? Because we have to appreciate one thing, that in the 21st century, we cannot ignore mining the minerals because this is actually the hidden wealth which is hidden beneath our earth, right? So this is exactly why we need to have an act which is comprehensively trying to regulate the entire mining sector in the country. Here comes in the MMDR Act, right? Now, firstly, understand one basic objective of this act. Since we know that minerals are important for each and every part of our lives. For example, talk about the infrastructure that you see around, right? It is made of various kind of construction materials. Also, we find iron, we find electronic items, we find variety of, say, use of minerals in your day-to-day life. So this is why minerals are important for our economic development. As and when we have better infrastructure projects, we actually talk about having an EV, electronic vehicle missions, semiconductor industry, AI data center. We cannot ignore the role of the mineral development in our country. So this is exactly why one of the first steps that this MMDR Act has done is to classify the minerals into two types. This is, I'm reminding you again, a very important topic for your prelims exam, because the variety of types and the categories of major and minor minerals are asked in the prelim statements. So firstly, understand one thing, that major minerals are actually divided into fuel, metallic, non-metallic and strategic and critical minerals. You understand that in the context of broader economic development and development as a nation, because we want to get developed by 2047 as a country, we need to regulate the minerals that gives us energy such as coal, natural gas, petrol. or that runs our factories, heavy industries, manufacturing, exports in the form of iron, chromite, zinc, and various types of non-metallic minerals such as limestone, and finally critical minerals too, which power our modern AI data centers. We understand this is why they are known as major minerals. They are actually very important for the overall development of the country, and this is why the rules are set by the central government. The royalty, which is actually the fees collected with reference to the mining revenues, are actually set by the central government but collected by the state governments. When we talk about the minor minerals, which are actually minerals which are generally of local infrastructure and construction in nature, such as ordinary sand, gravel, building stones, road metal, ordinary clay, fuller's earth, and various other types of minor minerals, these are actually regulated by the state government themselves. Right? So here the center has delegated the functions of regulations to the state government in the context of the minor minerals, right, where the royalty is actually fixed and collected individually by the individual states differently. So it is the major minerals where the central government has the upper hand. You have to remember this fact, which is actually very important. Now, when we talk about the MMDR Act, we actually have looked into the various objectives, right, as to how it is very important, and finally how this act is trying to categorize the various types of minerals into major and minor minerals for easier classification. Now understand why we needed this 2026 amendment bill in the very first place. Because the MMDR Act has been one source of controversy for many decades. Now, mining is not a new sector, right? MMDR Act is also not a new act. It has been existing for a long period of time. Now, when we talk about the pre-2015 era, why 2015? Because in 2015, major amendments were done. We are coming to that. But firstly, understand, before that major amendment, the role of the central government and the state government was actually very overlapping in nature, wherein the state government used various discretionary powers. I mean, different states, if you have seen the map of the country, variety of minerals are found in variety of states. Now, just imagine that if you are a private company who is interested in mining across various states, you will see that in the pre-2015 era, that different states had their own different rules. Firstly, for ease of doing business, this is not a good thing, right? You should have a uniform structure across the country. Secondly, there was a lot of discretionary power in the hands of the state governments because they actually awarded the various licenses to the private sector in general. And due to this bureaucracy, red tapeism became very prominent, due to which we actually saw scandals like the Colgate scam, right? And this is where the Supreme Court also told that natural resources should be national assets, and that is why the central government should have the responsibility of trying to regulate the sector in a proper way. This is where the attention was shifted into how we are giving the licenses to the private sector or even to the public sector for mining. Because how actually you award licenses to someone who is actually doing the mining is perhaps the most important stage of mining, right? Because here there can be instances of corruption, crony capitalism, right? So to get rid of those things, the government of India tried to somehow solve those kind of issues via the 2015 amendment to the MMDR Act. Now this amendment introduced a very transparent mechanism which looked transparent in the beginning, but it actually was also facing some issues as we go on from 2015. Now, e-auctions or electronic auctions were opened for the very first time, where the private sector can easily participate. I mean, the various private companies can participate in the bidding. For example, if some mine has been opened for auction in Odisha, so there should not be any restriction based on, say, the prior experience of a company or how they will be using their minerals at the end of their extraction. So there should not be any kind of restrictions based on any kind of prior experience or any kind of other arbitrary qualifications like before. And that is why some rules were standardized, and based on that, e-auctions were opened for the first time. After that, in this e-auction, the companies were also allowed, I mean the mining companies, also the private and the public companies, they were also allowed to have a composite license. Now imagine one simple thing, that if you are a mining company and you are interested to actually excavate a mine in Odisha, so what you will do, firstly you will send your experts, geologists, right? You will do stakeholder consultation before even you have started mining. So that is known as a prospecting stage. For that, you get the prospecting license. After that, once you have discovered the mines and the various wealth that is hidden within the earth, then you can do a proper mining, for which you get a mining license, right? After this, after 2015, initially this was given only for one mineral. Later this was actually extended to most of the minerals. I mean, if you actually go to that state and you find that, okay, there is a lot of iron deposit, but beside that iron deposit, you also find a lot of lithium deposit. So right now, composite licenses also talk about secondary, tertiary and various other kind of minerals too, along with this composite license. Now, apart from this, the MMDR Act is actually passed by the Parliament of the country. The Parliament of the country is operated by the members of the Parliament who are sent by the representatives. Now, there are so many villages, tribal sections, belts, forested areas in the country which are affected by mining. I mean, the mining also leads to the, desertation of land, sometimes even acquisition of land without much compensation to the proper landholders. Sometimes in these cases, various vulnerable sections of the population, tribal populations, are deprived of their land. So due to this, they actually can get 10 to 30% of the total mining revenue. And this would be deposited with the district mineral foundation for the local development, for actually trying to distribute the mineral wealth which was also, in their motherland, and distribute that wealth to them. Also, a National Mineral Exploration Trust was set up, which actually would charge an additional 2% of the mining revenue for the overall betterment of the mining sector in the country. Finally, to reduce the arbitrariness of the before 2015 times, right now mining leases are given for 50 years, which is a fixed lease. So here the bureaucracy cannot tell that it is only of 10 years, then you can extend it for another 10 years. So on a flat basis, 50-year license are given. Now, amendment in 2015 was done, but there were also various issues. So those issues were addressed in 2021. Now, in 2021, a removal of end-use restrictions were enabled. Now, to understand this, let us take an example. Say, we have the Tata Group, right? You know that in Jamshedpur, they have a huge steel factory. Now, that operating a steel plant needs a lot of energy. So, the Tata Group actually tried to argue with the government. Say, we are taking an example, that let us set up a coal plant that can power our steel factories. This coal plant will be located within our factory premises and only will be supplying energy by burning coal for our steel sector only, nothing else. We will not be initially supplying energy to the Jharkhand town, right? So this is where various companies actually started operating their own power plants, and sometimes they definitely saw that they were left with some extra electricity which actually came from their coal plant within their factories. So this facility is known as captive power plants. So sometimes this kind of captive power plants had some extra electricity that they can actually sell to the Jharkhand town electricity board, right? So this is where the end use restrictions were removed. Previously, we were not allowing the amount of diversion of, say, kind of captive power plants of one factory to other sectors. Also consider one other fact, maybe say the Tata Industries do not need these much of coal that they would mine for their captive power plants. They can also openly sell in the market, right? So there should not be any end restriction on what they would do with their coal. This is what was allowed. Also, open market commercial selling was allowed in the same philosophy. Also, seamless transfer of statutory clearances were done. Maybe, for example, there was an old mine with an old company, right? Now that company will be selling that mine to a new company. So whatever the licenses, environmental clearances, government approvals the old company had, those will be transferred without any hesitation, without any delay to the new company owner. So this was also done. Also, right to central auctioning was done, putting more power in the hands of the central government, and there are actually so many old cases which are still running in the mining sector. Those were also sorted out. So far we have seen how the MMDR Act actually evolved, and in this same way our mining sector also evolved. Now if you have seen one very curious pattern, that from 2015 onwards to 2021 we actually took various steps to improve the ease of mining in the country so that it could later translate into greater national growth in terms of GDP and mining sector as a whole. So you have to understand this thing very prominently, students, that the government of India always tries to make the ease of doing business better, and in this aspect sometimes there can be some negative impacts too. Now consider why this recent amendment was done. Say this is one mine in the state of Bihar, right? Now there is a private company who is doing this mining in some area. Now after mining, after they have sold the various types of minerals that they have mined here, the state government of Bihar came with 3 bills to that company. One is a royalty, if you remember, the major minerals part, where the royalty is actually set by the state, collected by the state. Apart from this, the state governments actually also levy mineral cess on and above the royalty. Also, that in the state list, land is a subject. So they can also collect the land tax, revenue tax on the top of royalty again. So if you understand, for that company in Bihar, they actually have to pay a lot of tax plus other charges of the government. Do you think this is going to make doing business easier? If costs with reference to administrative and taxation increase of a business? Definitely not. That is what many mining companies actually complained in the Supreme Court to the central government, to actually take away the mining taxation powers and some other kind of powers from the state government and reduce them, right? So this is exactly what was seen in this amendment. But before this, you have to also appreciate the fact that mining is actually both an union and a state issue. Why? Because in the 7th schedule, if you can understand, obviously in the union list, we have the regulation of mine and mineral development in public interest, where an act should be passed by the parliament, and the name of this act is, yes, your MMDR Act 1957. So that is an act which is still governing Indian mines. But when we talk about the state lists, so regulation of mine. So regulation of mine, the day-to-day regulation and mineral development. Also, the taxes on mineral rights, right? Where this is definitely subject to any limitation by the parliament. Definitely it is there. But if you go by the constitution allows the states to regulate the mines, impose mineral right taxes and taxes on land and buildings, right? So this is what was challenged by various companies to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court, in a very famous case, that is a Mineral Area Development Authority by versus SEAL 2024. Supreme Court kind of told that royalty is not a tax, right? The royalty which is collected by the state government for major mineral is actually a kind of a contractual fee that a private company or any public company interested in mining is paying to the landlord. Landlord here is the state, right? So it is actually not a tax. This is where you have to be very clear. Also, when we talk about states, states can actually tax. States can also tax mineral bearing land. This is what angered various private companies. They went to the Supreme Court, they could not actually get the justice in their favor, and they turned their lobby interest to the central government. The central government also kind of observed that, okay, there are so many multiplicity of laws, regulations at the state level itself. So this is why the Supreme Court 2024 order was actually kind of overruled right now by this 2026 legislation, where if before mineral bearing land was outside union's regulatory reach, right now in this bill, this is where we are talking about the features of this bill right now, that mineral bearing land is bought under the union regulation itself. If before mining was taxed differently by different states, right now it will be one uniform centrally set tax framework. Also, if before new levies were possible even after mining starts, right? I mean, state governments could actually tax some company after they have started mining. Those retrospective act could not be any longer be levied, and no state tax or any other kind of charges can be levied without central permission, right? So this is where the government is telling that, you know, if for a private company they are interested in doing mining in the country across various states, they need to have a certainty that across various states the laws are the same, the taxes are the same, the rules are the same, you know, also the various kind of charges are the same. So this restores the confidence of the investors. Even investors never love the retrospective tax. You know, if you impose some retrospective tax from before the business even started, so this is kind of an unfair activity, right? So this also means that, you know, at the end of the day, the cost of mining increases. If cost of mining increases, which is a kind of a raw material for various industries, right? Coal, petrol, iron, if these costs increase, definitely, but the consumer's cost also will be rising in the final stages. So this is exactly why, to support higher domestic mineral production and to support also the critical mineral mission, this act is passed right now in the parliament, right? But right now, there are so many controversies. Firstly, we have to also appreciate the fact. Now here we are looking on the other side of the debate. Firstly, we have looked into the benefits of the MMDR Amendment Bill 2026 just right now. Now let us look into the controversies, the issues. Firstly, we have to appreciate that the states actually bear many of the local costs, such as land acquisition, displacement, rehabilitation of people, environment degradation. Now, if the states do not have the power to recover the costs here, these very parameters will degrade. I mean, you know, the environmental aspect, if you can talk about, the states spend some of the money to actually restore the environment, that money will be lost. Also, the states thrive under competitive federalism. You know, if the government would have allowed the states to tax differently, the states definitely would have kept lower taxes because, for example, the state of Bihar would compete against state of Jharkhand when we talk about mines and mineral projects. So let there be competition in federalism. Also, when we talk about taking away the power of the states to tax and levy charges, isn't it taking away fiscal federalism according to various experts? Also, when we talk about incentives to various states, the incentives will reduce because the states will right now leave everything to the center for mining. So they will not be spending their energy maybe or resources. Also, the previous miners, the old mining companies which had actually dutifully paid their taxes over and over the decades, right now they were ethical, they paid their taxes. Now if this retrospective clause is removed, right, so those companies who intentionally did not pay the coal taxes or various other mining taxes for years, right, they will actually be winning in this thing. And the ethical taxpayers, ethical companies which have paid the taxes, they will not actually get their refunds back, right? And finally, this can also put a lot of power in the hands of bureaucracy, because at the end of the day, bureaucracy can have the power at the center to approve the various projects, sign the various kind of charges and the fees. So this is what we have to learn from other countries too. For example, say it is actually a model. I mean, the MMDR 2026 bill is actually a model where the government of India is actually moving towards developed countries like Australia, right, and US, where they both have more of a centralization tendency in mining aspects. It is only Canada where we actually see that the provinces actually have heavy resource taxes. So we can also learn from their model. And right now, when we have a lot of quarter of the experts and the state governments, they actually have some concerns with this amendment. So the way forward here would be in the hands of the Finance Commission, where the Finance Commission actually distributes central revenues, I mean the taxes, right, which are collected in the form of income taxes, GSTs, right, they're distributed between the center and the states. So cannot we have a new term in the 16th Finance Commission? That term is known as ecological cost of extraction, where the states which actually have higher mines, a lot of mines and a lot of revenues also come from the mines. Now after the 2026 bill, the revenues can go down. So to compensate that, let us give them some extra funds. Also, the Pucci Commission recommended that the central government should be regulating mines in the national interest. So this is why, the MMDR Act or the Bill 2026 is actually justified also, because mines are national assets. So herein, the role of CAG becomes very important, where they can audit the district mineral foundations. Also, when we talk about the Article 14, where we have the right to equality. So remember those dutiful taxpayers which paid their dues, and those non-dutiful taxpayers who did not pay their dues. So if the retrospective taxes are removed by the states, right, so the non-dutiful people will actually have higher profits. And finally, there should be a mathematical formula for the MMDR Act. I mean, what kind of formula should be there with reference to one particular mineral, right? What should be the royalty? So there should be one kind of fixed percentage. And finally, we can also learn from the countries that we have seen just now. So this was an 360-degree coverage of the MMDR Bill 2026. Let me know what is the answer to this and move on to the next topic, where we have an editorial regarding the recent changes which are proposed in the draft National Food Security Amendment Bill 2026. So from the perspective of your prelims, where we have the National Food Security Act, there have been various PYQs related to the NFSA. Let us try to understand also from the perspective of GS2 and 3 why this amendment bill is very important. So firstly, when we talk about the National Food Security Act, this is right now a legal right in India for right to food under Article 21, which was also established by the Supreme Court, that the various vulnerable sections of the population should have access to nutritional food, and due to which, the government of India since around 1960s, since the time of Green Revolution, right, have set up various institutions such as the public distribution systems, the fair price shops, or also known as the ration shops. In the mid 1960s, we also had the establishment of Food Corporation of India, which is actually trusted with the responsibility of collecting the food grains at MSP, minimum support price, from the farmers, storing the food grains at the FCI godowns, and distributing them to the various state governments, where the state governments under the public distribution system would distribute the food via the ration shops to the lowest of the lowest strata of the society, that is the poorest of the population. So in the 1990s, the targeted public distribution system tried to distinguish which category of Indian citizens would get the entitlement of free food grains. So based on this, there were two categories which were identified. One was actually the above the poverty line population who were still vulnerable and who were actually still very close to poverty, right? And one would be extreme below poverty line populations who are known as Antyodaya Anna Yojana households. Now, Antyodaya Anna Yojana households actually gets 35 kilogram per family in terms of the food grain. So this is a flat quantity per family when we talk about the support given by the National Food Security Act 2013. So, here the Antyodaya Anna Yojana gets a per family allocation, while the other classes of population who are generally above the poverty line, they get the priority household allocation where they get 5 kilograms of cereals per person. So this is where the topic of today's discussion very important. You have to understand the priority households get on an individual basis. The Antyodaya Anna Yojana gets on a per family basis, right? Because we have to understand the rationale of the government that Antyodaya Anna Yojana families are actually the poorest of the families. That's why they must be given irrespective of the number of members in their household. So based on a central issue price, this is a price at which the vulnerable section of the population would purchase rice, wheat and various other coarse grain from the ration shops. So based on this price, the people generally get the benefit under the National Food Security Scheme, right? So this scheme actually covers 67% of India, 75% of rural India, 50% of urban India. And here it is a joint responsibility of both the central and the state government to implement this act. Mainly it is the implementation part where the state government is much more responsible than the central government, because it is where the Food Corporation of India will be supplying the food grains along with the state governments to the fair price shops, as we already discussed. Now there is a very good feature of this scheme where ration cards are actually issued to the eldest woman who is actually minimum of 18 years in a household. So this is where this act is also one of the examples where it tries to empower the women of the household, right? On the other hand, if someone is not getting the food supply, they are actually assured of compensation and even penalties. And if various complaints are there, corruptions or various other things are there, grievance redressal is also there. Right now, grievance redressal happens online. Apart from that, if you talk about the nature of the food grains, they are also right now fortified with various important micro and macronutrients such as iron, right? So that apart from food security, which consists of affordability, access, right, to good and nutritious food, people also gets various vitamins, minerals and various other nutrients. Also, when we talk about the various distribution systems of the Food Corporation of India and the state government of India, right now we are using technology where we are using various platforms to automate the distribution of the rations. So this was the basics of how we have to appreciate the National Food Security Act and the public distribution system. Right now, the government has introduced the 2026 amendment bill again in this sector. So let us understand what this amendment is trying to do. So when we talk about the Antyodaya Anna Yojana households, remember it was a 35 kilograms per family allocation of food grains. It was a household-centric approach earlier, right? And it is actually given free of charges to the AAY households. The various prices that you have seen, 3 rupees, 2 rupees and 1 rupees, was generally for the priority sector. Now, the best part of this amendment right now is that the free charges are still continued. 35 kilogram per household is still there as one limit, but there is a new limit which has come, that right now this allocation under the AAY households will be given on an individual basis to the maximum of 7 kg per person. So this means that if there are 2 family members only in that family, they will be getting 2 into 7, 14 kilograms. Earlier they used to get how many? 35 kilograms per households. So this is why various states such as Tamil Nadu and Kerala are complaining regarding this, because these states have worked hard to reduce their population, right? They also tell that in one family, maybe a family of 4, there are 3 unproductive members. Maybe one is an elderly citizen, one is actually very young to work, one can also be someone who is belonging from the disabled community. So there is only one person who is working, and earlier they used to get 35 kilograms of food grains. Right now, how many they will be getting? Only 28, if there is a family of 4. So this means that it can tomorrow increase your household expenses. So cost of living for the below the poverty line people can actually increase. So maybe this act is trying to do opposite to what is kind of the main objective of the National Food Security Act is really. Now on the government side, the government is telling that it is ensuring fairer per capita allocation so that wastages will reduce. As you have seen, there are a lot of wastages. There are various fake ration card holders. Also, this eliminates a situation where 2 family members, right, and an 8 family members receive the same quantity, right? Also, it is also trying to rationalize the food subsidy expenditure, because we actually spend lakhs of crores on subsidies, and food subsidy is also one major component within that. So we can also save some money. Now, the article which was published in the Hindu today is kind of opposing this formula. Why? Firstly, you have to appreciate the fact, okay, if there is only one person in the household, that person is getting 7 kg into 1, that is 7 kg total. Compare to the fact that many BPL families actually have more than 4 or 5 members. So in case they have 6 members, before they were getting 35 kilos, which was not that comfortable, but still they could manage. But right now, if there is a family of 6 into 7, right, is how much? 42 kilograms, right? But they would get 35 kilos only. So this means that things did not improve for them. On the other hand, members who actually were up to 5 in number, they were getting a proportionate benefit, but who are more than 5, they are not getting that particular benefit, right? So people actually reduces entitlement for the overall population, if you see, in this kind of distribution. Even if you talk about the family members who are 4 in number, they are also getting 28 kilograms, which is less than 35 kilograms. And you have to understand one important pattern, guys, that since they were getting 35 kilograms for almost 2 decades right now, right, and even more than 2 decades, so this is a kind of a habit of food choices that they already have created. So you're telling right now that they will be getting less food grains. So this is why, a lot of opposition is coming. Also, smaller households can have less economically active members. We have just seen the case of a household where there can be 4 members, but 3 can be non-economically active due to elderly population, disabled sections of the population, even the youth who cannot work. Also, there can be inclusion errors. Some non-deserving people are included in the ration cards. Some deserving people are left out because we are still following the 2011 census, which is outdated, right? Also, food security right now, it's not only about calories or kilograms. It is also about macro and micronutrients, due to which we have to move beyond rice, wheat, cereals. We have to move toward pulses, oil seeds. We have to move towards maybe healthy fats, and most importantly, protein-rich products. Because there has been a recent study by the ICMR in collaboration with IndiaB, where there is evidence that even the people who are getting this kind of entitlement under the National Food Security Act, they are actually suffering from diabetes and pre-diabetes. This means that excessive reliance on cereals under the National Food Security Act is making them or their diet more carbohydrate rich, where we need a more balanced diet. So this is exactly why This amendment must do more things, solve more angles here. So what we need to do right now, according to this article, the main way forward is firstly, have some convergence with already existing kind of campaigns such as the Anganwadi, ICDS, PM Poshan, where we have to actually try to include the National Food Security Act and the diversification that is needed within this act itself. That is, we have to diversify to oil seeds, pulses, millets and various other aspects, where the Anganwadis, right, can actually play a very important role into talking about not only food security but nutritional security. Because if you talk about India, we have one of the largest population of undernourished, overweight, underweight even populations. So this is where a convergence is needed with Anganwadi centers, PM Poshan initiative and various other nutritional security initiatives. Next, we have to also understand that if rice is given in such huge quantities, it is because rice is also procured in huge quantities because of the MSP regime which is going on in the country. You know, MSP favors rice wheat system, which also is water guzzling in nature, which depletes groundwater and is also linked to climate change. On the other hand, it is also leading to a lot of carbohydrate rich diet. And you know, if you talk about implementation of MSP for the farmers who are growing pulses or millets or oilseeds, that is also not properly done. Even if the pulses and the various other MSP prices are announced, the final procurement is also not done. We have seen that in the previous analyst sessions also. I have showed you various data. In that data, it was shown that rice was actually procured more than pulses and so on. So this is what we have to also alter the MSP regime by promoting higher prices for pulses so that more farmers actually talk about growing pulses. So MSP should be acting as a demand certainty. Finally, we also need evidence-based policy making, right? Herein, we have to also understand what is the real outcome of the food security program. I mean, we have to go here state by state, district by district cases as to which districts and which sections of the population within that district would need more than 7 kilograms and which families or which kind of communities would need less. So that is where we have to go via outcome specific policy making. Also, when we talk about the one nation, one ration card, here we need better implementation of the same. It is already a reality right now that a migrant population in the country can secure food grains from any ration shop. But is that really happening at their end? Because there are so many issues of Aadhaar non-authentication, where food grains are denied to them due to non-verification of Aadhaar card. Sometimes there also have been deaths due to this, right? So this means the implementation is not proper. The point of service machines which is there in the various ration shops also do not work sometimes. So this is where the state government and the district officials or the district magistrates, they should be taking care. Also, the fair price shops, apart from only giving the food grains, they should transform themselves into nutrition information centers, which can actually help them in giving better nutrition oriented facts, information regarding protein, awareness campaigns of the importance of protein rich diet, a diversified balanced diet, so that the people at the lowest levels of the society, they can actually get educated and have better food. So this was all for this main section. Now let us move on to the value addition sector. So we have 3 articles today. The first article is regarding the CBI probe regarding a Chhattisgarh custodial death, which brings our main importance and our attention to the data and the status of custodial death in the country. If you have seen over the last 5 years, there have been on an average more than 140 custodial deaths in our Indian prisons. And if you see, the top states here is actually Bihar, Rajasthan, UP. Please also look at the various other important information from your handout in the broader context of custodial violence in the country. This is the same kind of violence that you have witnessed in various movies of Bollywood too. right? So this means that this is actually a colonial mindset, that police authorities oppress various persons without proper conviction at the police stations. So here, due to the lack of CCTV or body cameras or various other surveillance technologies with the police have a free hand into kind of torturing the various inmates. Now there can be various reasons. I mean, for example, a colonial mindset is actually a very important factor. From British times only, custodial torture was very common, which has actually carried on. Our prisons are also overcrowded. Police face an immense pressure, that is why, to solve cases, to reduce the prison burden, and due to which they want to extract confessions, sometimes even fake confessions, which leads to investigation bias. And finally, India actually kind of onboarded the United Nations Convention Against Torture but did not ratify it, right? So this is why this kind of things actually goes on silently in the police stations, which is why it prompted the Supreme Court to take various strict Supreme Court judgments. Firstly, in the D.K. Basu case, wherein the Supreme Court actually gave detailed guidelines into the conduct of the police officer at the police stations, right? What should be the interrogative procedures and so on. Also, the Prakash Singh case gave an overall recommendation of the police reforms in the country, which also included custodial violence and reducing it. And finally, the Paramveer Singh Saini versus Baljit Singh 2020 actually recommended that there should be CCTV cameras at all police stations, right? So that surveillance is kind of enforced, right? Investigation must also be modernized according to the Supreme Court case, where there should be body cameras, just like our foreign police officers. And most importantly, we should be doing sensitization and reform and kind of training of the police officers to reduce this torture. Now, come to the next article, which is an article in the Indian Express, an editorial which is talking about the shortcomings of the Viksit Bharat G Ramji Act 2025. Formally, it was known as the Manrega scheme. So you understand that recently there were so many changes which were done in the Manrega Act, right? So this is why, see that 125 days of employment in the form of wage employment will be given, support to agriculture and various other features we already know. But yeah, we are mainly concerned with the critiques, the shortcomings of this particular act. So firstly, the author is arguing here that this is against Article 258 of the Constitution of the country, because here 40% of the funds has to be denoted by the state government, right? And without a particular formal agreement with all the states, according to the authors here, this is not constitutional. Also, the scheme has various technological aspects, such as the National Mobile Monitoring Service to track the workers at the work sites, and also the eKYC verification of the workers with the Government of India. So there are also issues here. Just like the Food Security Act and the issues of Aadhaar card, the same issues are here. And there have been various issues of non-payment of wages, where if you talk about the wages right now, it is set at 300 rupees per day, which is actually below the minimum wages also. Now, when we talk about the 50% drop in the rural jobs, this shows that it is having a 35% almost decline in total percent days under the Manrega scheme. So this means that there are some technical issues with this act. So for your answers, it is very important that you know the issues, also know the solutions. So here the authors are telling central government to take 100% of the financial responsibility. While it is not that practical, the state government should be contributing various aspects of day-to-day fundings. But yeah, majority of the responsibility must be with the central government, because this is a nationwide scheme. Also, the technology must be human-centric. It should not be having this kind of exclusion errors, non-payment of wages, where we need to actually improve the same with better technology, maybe with AI. Also, we have to increase the wages according to the Satpathy Committee recommendation, which recommended 375 rupees per day in 2018. So definitely it will increase today due to inflation. Finally, there is also a recommendation of conducting social audits, asking the workers themselves how they feel about the implementation of this act. So this was all for this value addition, and next to the final one, where right now Meta, Facebook's parent company, is facing the biggest test of social media regulation regarding the youth. If you already are following the news right now, you have seen how various parts of the world is moving towards banning social media for teenagers. Why? Because there are some arguments in favor of strict regulation. Firstly, social media in the hands of young kids is kind of a negative externality. This means that there are some various features of social media which actually can lead the youth to develop addiction towards reels and so on, which all of us are also somehow kind of addicted, right? Imagine what the youth would be impacted due to this. So negative externalities or negative impacts out of this can impact their future, career, etc. Where the social media companies know nothing other than attention, where they actually use various hidden patterns, dark patterns to hook the users, mainly the youth, where there is kind of a vacuum for regulating the social media behavior of the youth, right? Also, the corporate accountability of those big tech platforms, social media platforms, is very, very low. They have not done significant things apart from age gating. Age gating can be easily be bypassed by providing false age or using VPNs, right? And finally, the data of the youth can be twisted in various other aspects. So if there is a question based on the need for regulation of social media, or also the recent trend in which various countries such as Australia, even UK, which has actually undergone with some legislation to ban social media for the youth, you can actually give these kind of suggestions and arguments for the strict regulations. On the other hand, when we talk about the arguments against the regulation, it is mainly with reference to overreach of the government. Government sometimes can, put in various other kind of legislations. On the other hand, innovation and other kind of aspects of the social media companies, they can also be affected. But there is a broader consensus that the same regulation should be done for the youth in India also. So with this, now let us finally move on to the prelims pointers. But the first article is actually a proposal by a parliamentary committee to examine whether India should be supporting the de-dollarisation push at the 18th BRICS Summit in New Delhi in September. So this is why the BRICS Summit is coming up, and right now we are talking about if we need de-dollarization or not. So this has been in the debates by various countries such as Russia, China, India, South American countries, and even South Africa and Australia, where we understand that dollar is actually the international reserve currency, which means that dollar is actually that currency which is used in most of the international transactions. And this means that almost all of the world, including India, is dependent on dollars, right, for our exports and imports. And in cases of conflicts such as the Russia-Ukraine issue, which imposed a lot of sanctions on Russia to supply Russian oil to India, for example. So this is where India actually have faced various issues in the trading aspects if we really want our financial or trading freedom as a country. So this is why, the entire world is talking about moving away from the dollar. While it is very difficult, but let us actually talk about what can be the main important themes for your examination. So if we talk about using the dollar less, there are three ways. The first way is to set up Vostro and Nostro accounts. So this means that there can be a foreign bank which can have our money in dollars, and in India we have our own domestic banks. So they have some mutual agreements between themselves to exchange their currencies in dollars and rupees at various determined rates even at market rates for easy transaction and direct transactions of the various goods and services. So if there is an Indian exporter who want to export some products to Russia, so the Russian bank and the Indian bank can have some, mechanisms of fast currency exchange. So here we are actually bypassing dollars, and also the US dominated system known as SWIFT, which is an interbank messaging platform, which is also dominated by the US a lot. Now, we can also use the central bank digital currencies. You already know that these are actually, in the context of India, Reserve Bank of India backed digital currencies based on blockchain technology. So this means that RBI will have its own cryptocurrency, with which RBI can actually give the cryptocurrencies to the various merchants and the common people, and they can go abroad and do the transaction in CBDC itself. Mainly with those countries where we actually need the de-dollarization aspects. Finally, there is a proposal of a common BRICS currency, which is also trying to replace the US dollar. Because if you understand, US dollar is actually the king when we talk about global investment, transactions and so on. The euro, British pound only comes second and third. So this means that when we talk about why the dollar is so supreme, it is because the dollar is having high network with reference to the US influence over the entire world. Also, the US bond market is very, very prominent. So all over the world, most of the foreign investors from various countries, they buy US bonds as safe investments, which is actually, indirectly, directly also backed by the US government, and where the dollar value and the US government bond value is also indirectly and directly pegged. And finally, when we talked about that third possibility, about the BRICS currency, so this is where this was a proposal which was going on for various years, and recently Trump told that if there is a BRICS currency which is coming up, that country will be facing 100% tariff, right? And this is exactly why, there are various sections of the population throughout the entire world who are actually very angry. Even, the Parliament Standing Committee asked the government what is our agenda, what we are doing to increase our own financial freedom and decouple from the US, basically from the US dollar, right? Even recently, the Reserve Bank of India repeatedly actually tried to advocate that we should be linking our central bank digital currency with the currencies of the BRICS countries. So this is where we have to understand where this BRICS currency is coming from. As you know, that BRICS is actually consisting of one of the most prominent up and developing countries, right? So here, the BRICS currency cooperation framework was actually seen for the first time when Western countries, mainly US, sanctioned Russia during the US-Russia war. So this led Russia scrambling for sources. Mainly, for example, India imported a lot of Russian oil, right? Wherein we earlier used to use dollar only. But right now, if there is a sanction, we cannot use dollar with Russia right now. So definitely we need some other mechanisms, right? So this is when the countries actually thought about agreeing on currency cooperation. And hence the formation of BRICS Payment Task Force was done, which emphasized on the importance of the BRICS common currency at the Kazan Summit 2024. So this is exactly why we know we have to appreciate that as of now, we have various initiatives for de-dollarization in the entire world. For example, there is M-Bridge product, which is backed by China and Taiwan. BRICS payment mechanism, China's digital one, which is the same with reference to our almost the CBDC of RBI. So this is where we have to talk about integrating with reference to the de-dollarization trend which is going on. But we also have to become very cautious, because India recently publicly opposed via our minister that there is no support for any such scheme that is known as BRICS currency. But we have to understand this is a reality that the US power goes beyond the currencies, right? Goes beyond dollars. They actually are kind of influencing a lot of internal policies also in various other nations. So this is where India must be having a balanced approach. That is, we should not be totally discarding dollars. We should be having a balanced approach. For example, we can get integrated into the MBRICS platform here, where Thailand is also a part of, where we're actually talking about central bank digital currency and the linkages between that. Also, we can link India's UPI for some international transaction for tourism also, which we are also doing in the various Middle Eastern countries. So in the comment section, you can let me know which are the countries which allow India's UPI. Also for microtransactions, we need more UPI so that those transactions are held without conversion of dollars to rupees and vice versa. Also, in the IMF, the US actually has more than 10% vote. So that is where the US is also influencing a lot of decisions at the IMF stage, where the use of dollar is actually promoted by the US mainly at the IMF too. So the power of countries such as India, China and various other developing countries is reduced due to that, which is why we should push for reforms at the recent upcoming meeting of the IMF. And finally, we should also come up with a reinsurance mechanism under the BRICS first before coming up with a de-dollarization approach, because we have to understand that most of the trade happens because of insurance cover given by the US companies. Why not we give that cover to the ships and the various other companies under the BRICS framework? So gradually we can actually get less dependent on the US institutions. So this is all for this one. Now let us move on to the next, in which we will understand why recently the retail inflation increased to 4.45%. Firstly, understand the very basics of inflation here. Inflation, you have to be very, very cautious with reference to price rise. Price rise means it can be rise in prices of one or two commodities. Inflation means it is a general, persistent, continuous rise in price levels across commonly used goods and services in a country in a particular period of time. So this means that when we talk about measuring inflation at the local market, shopping malls, where we go and buy the various goods and services, that is known as the CPI, Consumer Price Index. It is released by the National Statistical Office every single month. As of now, the base year is 2024. Recently, the base year has been changed, and the method of also how we measure inflation across various items such as food, clothing, health, transportation, they also have changed in the new series versus the old series. So, for your prelims information, please do go and see what are the various significant changes which have taken place, right? Also, when we talk about measuring inflation at the retail level, this is where we had the CPI. At the wholesale market, at the mandis that we have seen, it is the wholesale price index. And right now, recently launched, we have the producers price index, which is measuring inflation at the factory level. Now, when we come to this news here, this is where, before discussing the news, we have to talk about the Monetary Policy Committee of the RBI. So here, this RBI committee is a statutory committee. It is having 6 members. These members, 3 come from the RBI, 3 come from the government of India. They do what? They actually talk about what would be the monetary policy of the country. They come and set the qualitative and the quantitative tools. Remember, these are the repo rate, liquidity adjustment facility, marginal standing facility, and the various other aspects such as priority sector lending. So most of the things are actually set by them. Why? Because they have a target of maintaining inflation within 4 plus minus 2%. This means that when we talk about inflation in the country, it should be around 4%, right? A minimum of 2 to a maximum of 6. That means 4 maybe is the golden number, which we should not cross. But as of now, inflation is at 4.45%. If you see, most of the inflation that we have seen is actually in the case of food inflation, where we see mainly going out at restaurant, cafe, or some crops such as tomato, their prices have increased a lot, right? Due to the increase in the food price inflation, we see generally the core inflation, it is actually higher, right? So you already know that in the core inflation, from the overall headline inflation, we exclude the volatile items such as fuel items and food items. So herein, we understand since the food inflation is actually higher, that is exactly why the retail inflation also came up to be higher. But actually, when we talk about the core inflation, this is actually quite lower and manageable, right? For example, when we talk about the various other aspects such as fuel, fuel inflation we have seen, but as of now it is stabilizing. The price of oil is around $80 to $85 per barrel. It's kind of stabilizing. Also, the monsoon concerns are also kind of fading away because India almost had a normal monsoon. But it is also a cause of concern that the rural inflation is higher than the urban inflation. This means that the cost of living is actually increasing in the rural areas. So this was all for this topic. Now let us move on to the next one, where we have a very important article with reference to police custody. Under the BNSS, you know that the Indian Penal Code, Code of Criminal Procedure and Indian Evidence Act were consolidated in these three important legislations of 2023. So this is where let us actually understand mainly firstly the differences between police and judicial custody, a very important topic for the prelims exam. Firstly, understand that when a person is actually kind of arrested by the police, within 24 hours according to the BNS section 58, that particular person must be produced before the judicial magistrate. And after that, police custody can be a maximum of 15 days, not more than that. Now, let us understand the main differences between police and judicial custody. So, definitely, police custody means that a person is locked in jail at the police station, right? And mainly when we talk about the interrogation, questioning, it is where the police can directly interrogate the person, where mainly police also have the control of the particular custody. And finally, whenever they need any kind of other extra interrogation or investigation. And finally, on the other hand, judicial custody means that that particular person is actually under the custody of the court and magistrate. So this means that the accused will be staying in jail or prison, and that custody will be in safe legal custody, wherein the police cannot, under particular laws in the country, cannot question freely without court permission. Also, the jail authorities keep the accused here in control, not the police. So there is a difference between jail authorities and the police administration. So this is what we have to be very clear with first. But here right now, when we talk about the BNSS Act here right now, this is where the section 187 becomes very important, because there was a recent Supreme Court case. So what happened, a judicial magistrate in the country actually told that a police cannot detain or keep that particular person under police custody for more than 8 days, right? But the Supreme Court stepped in between in this particular state of Andhra Pradesh case and told that an additional 7 days can be given to the police custody, because under the BNSS, it is actually legal to hold a person under police custody for 15 days, right? So this means that the total detention limit, right, in India as of now will be 90 days if it is a very serious case such as life imprisonment, death or jail more than 10 years. And for lesser offenses, it is 60 days. So this is a total detention limit, absolute limit that a police can have under, detention. Now, under BNS, it is actually allowed that this 15 days of police custody can be taken with breaks also. Say for example, the person was detained for 3 days under police custody. Then after say around 2 months, that is around 60 days, the person was found to actually murder someone with proper guns and knives as evidence. If some new evidence comes up within 2 months of investigation, that person will be maybe again taken to 7 days of extra police custody apart from the 3 days taken before. Now this was not allowed before under IPC. This is allowed right now under BNS. So police custody can be taken in cases of breaks, in cases of gaps also, right? So firstly, it can be taken in chunks with reference to the first 60 days out of the 90 days for serious offenses like the above, and for only up to 40 days, up to 60 days maximum of total detention limit under less serious offenses. So this was all for this one. Apart from this, it is also clarified by the Supreme Court that the right to meet an advocate during interrogation is actually a right for the kind of inmates, but the advocate should not be there throughout the investigation, very close to the various peoples who are actually detained, because it can jeopardize the investigation. So this was all for this topic. Now you please go through this prelims traps, which is also given in your discussion handout. With this, let us move on to the next topic, where this is the last one, which is talking about Kazakhstan becoming desperate for cloud seeding. Let us understand how cloud seeding actually works. Everything starts with, the formation of clouds high up in the air. You know that cloud is actually formed by collection of small water droplets which are so light that they float above the sky. And due to various winds, clouds also stay afloat. And whenever the clouds gather in size, get bigger in number, then they become heavy and fall as rainfall under gravity. The simple mechanism. Why I told you this? Because this is what is used to engineer rainfall artificially. What we do, we send some aircrafts nearby some very heavy clouds, such as cumulus clouds. Therein, we release this material, which is known as a flare. If you have played, PUBG and all those games, you have gotten those flare guns. Similarly to that only, you have this kind of flare, which is consisting of magnesium, sodium chloride, potassium chloride, and some chemicals. These chemicals, do what? They actually help the formation of more heavier clouds, because these are actually known as cloud condensation nuclei. Cloud condensation nuclei enable the formation of water droplets on the nuclei itself, and the clouds hence get bigger in size. Hence, under gravity, it falls as rainfall. But you have to keep in mind, it is not guaranteed that rainfall will happen definitely, because of various temperature and humidity conditions. But you should also actually know that there are two types of cloud seeding, generally during cold and warm climates. So based on that, in cold clouds, we generally use silver iodide or dry ice. In warm clouds, we generally use sodium chloride or potassium chloride. Now, Kazakhstan, if you look at the map, is located here, and approximately in this position, we have the Turkestan region of Kazakhstan, which is known for its cotton cultivation. Now, for some time, due to the Soviet era irrigation channels, which degraded the rivers of the system so much, if you also have seen in the previous analyst session, I showed you the Aral Sea. Aral Sea actually sank due to diversion of river water due to irrigational projects. If you see, the shorelines of the sea is right now shrunk to only this much. Why? Because of huge amount of cotton cultivation and projects which are coming up, and also the previous mistakes of the Soviet government. So on the other hand, right now, there are actually regions in Kazakhstan which are actually 8 months without rainfall, facing heat wave conditions. So this means this is why they are going away with the artificial rainfall plants. On the other hand, their neighbor Kyrgyzstan, they are not happy. They are thinking that if Kazakhstan is doing artificial rainfall, Kazakhstan is stealing the clouds from the sky. A very funny thing to discuss, which was also debunked by World Meteorological Organization, that cloud seeding does not lead to, the amount of clouds which is available for the neighboring countries. But definitely, whenever we talk about bioengineering or geoengineering, they always have some concerns, such as this one. So it should be in our memory that due to the diversion of the Amu Darya and Seed Darya river, there can be various negative impacts on the environment. Similarly, we do not know what will be the long-term impacts of artificial rainfall. So this was all for this one. Now let us solve the questions which is upcoming soon. So let us meet again in the next one. Till then, thank you, all the best and best of luck.